Growing up, I always felt like an afterthought in my own family. My parents had 2 kids, me, Ethan, 28M, and my younger brother Noah, 22M. From the very beginning, it was clear Noah was their favorite. Actually, favorite doesn't even cut it. They treated him like royalty, while I was more like background noise. It wasn't just little things like who got the last cookie. It was everything. I remember when I graduated high school, I got a $50 bill in a card with, "We're so proud of you," scribbled inside. 2 years later, Noah got a fully loaded car as a, "You're doing so great" gift. Never mind that I was already working part-time jobs to pay for community college, while Noah lounged around at home. I'll admit, for a long time, I tried to let it slide. I told myself it was just the way things were. When I finally moved out last year, I thought I was breaking free. It felt like the start of something new, like I could finally build a life where I didn't have to compete for scraps of attention. And for a while, it was good. Quiet, but good. Then, out of nowhere, they called me up one night. I remember it vividly. My mom hit me with, "We were thinking maybe you could start putting aside part of your salary for Noah's future wedding." I was speechless. Noah wasn't even dating anyone at the time. It wasn't like he had a serious girlfriend, let alone plans to settle down. And here they were asking me, a single guy hustling to get by, to save my hard-earned money for some hypothetical event in Noah's life. I told them I'd think about it, mostly because I was too stunned to say anything else. But apparently, even that wasn't good enough. A few days later, my dad called me. No preamble, no small talk. He just jumped straight into it. He said he'd heard I was hesitant about the wedding fund and that he was disappointed in me. "You've always been so selfish," he said. Selfish? After everything I'd done to support them, to be the responsible one, to try to earn their approval, it was like a switch flipped in my brain. That was the moment I realized the truth I'd been avoiding my whole life. I'd never really mattered to them. No matter how much I gave, it would never be enough. They didn't see me as their son, not in the same way they saw Noah. To them, I was just there, the extra, the backup plan. And honestly, that realization hurt more than I can even put into words. Anyway, my life up until that point had been a grind, plain and simple. I was scraping by, juggling bills, and trying to keep my head above water. You know how it is, paycheck to paycheck, crossing your fingers that nothing major breaks because you can't afford to fix it. I wasn't bitter about it or anything. It was just life, and I figured that's how most people get by. No handouts, no shortcuts, just putting in the work and hoping things eventually get easier. I didn't have much, but what I had, I'd earned. Then, out of nowhere, the impossible happened. One random Tuesday night, I'm sitting in my tiny apartment, eating ramen and half watching some trashy reality show when I remembered I had a lottery ticket I'd bought on a whim a few days before. I don't usually play, but I'd been at the gas station, and something about the big jackpot sign caught my eye. Why not? I thought. So I pulled the crumpled ticket out of my jacket pocket and decided to check it. And holy crap, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. I didn't just win a little. This wasn't one of those dinky $50 scratcher wins where you get excited and then realize it barely covers your gas money. No, this was the real deal. $500,000, $500,000. I remember staring at the ticket, convinced I'd made some kind of mistake. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might actually pass out. My palms were so sweaty I had to put the ticket down because I was afraid I'd smudge the numbers. I checked the numbers again and again, about 10 times, just to be sure, and every single time they matched. It didn't feel real. It felt like a glitch in the universe. My brain was a mess, half shouting, "This can't be happening," and half trying to figure out what the hell to do next. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the ticket like it might catch fire in my hand. $500,000. That was more money than I'd ever seen in my entire life. More money than I ever thought I'd have. It wasn't enough to retire or anything, but it was enough to completely change the game. Enough to breathe for the first time in years. Enough to stop scraping by and start actually living. The weight on my shoulders started to lift. I could finally stop living paycheck to paycheck, constantly stressed about rent or whether my car would survive another year. This money wasn't just a financial windfall, it was freedom. And let me tell you, I had plans. Big ones. I wasn't about to go full-on reckless, blowing it all on fancy cars or designer clothes. That's not me. No, I wanted to invest it into something meaningful, something I'd been dreaming about for years, a clothing line for kids. I'd been into design since college, and now I finally had the chance to turn those sketches into reality. For once, I wasn't just surviving. I was building. Little did I know that money was about to turn my family into a whole new kind of nightmare. Naturally, I shared the news with my family. Big mistake. You'd think they'd be happy for me, right? Nope. The moment they found out, it was like a switch flipped. My mom didn't even say congratulations. Her first words were, "Oh, so now you can help us with the mortgage." Then my dad chimed in with, "And Noah, you can finally pay for him to go to med school." I thought they were joking at first. I laughed and said, "No, the money is for me. I've got plans for it." That's when the mood shifted. My mom said, "Ethan, this is a blessing for the family. You need to think about everyone, not just yourself." My dad nodded. "Noah's always dreamed of being a doctor," he added. "This is your chance to make that happen." I couldn't wrap my head around what was happening. We were sitting in my parents' living room, and the conversation had somehow veered into the twilight zone. They were acting like the lottery win wasn't my accomplishment, like the check was made out to the family of Ethan, and I was just the lucky one holding it. My mom started in with her usual family-first spiel, going on about how Noah's med school dreams were within reach now, how they could finally pay off the mortgage, how this was an opportunity for all of us. She even threw in some line about how this would bring us closer together. Yeah, nothing brings people together like turning one person into an ATM, right? I tried to stay calm, but inside I was boiling. I told them straight up, "This money is for me. I've worked my ass off for years, with no help, no handouts. I finally have a chance to build something for myself, and I'm not giving that up." Cue the waterworks. My mom's face crumpled, and the tears started falling like she was auditioning for an Oscar. She hit me with the classic guilt line. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us?" Done for me? My jaw practically hit the floor. I wanted to laugh, but I was too angry. What had they ever done for me besides throw every ounce of attention, affection, and support at Noah? Every milestone in my life had been met with indifference. Graduating college, a pat on the back. Landing my first job? Barely a nod. Meanwhile, Noah sneezed, and they were throwing him a parade. I didn't yell. I didn't even raise my voice. I just said, "No, that money is going toward my business, and that's final." My dad wasn't having it. He called me greedy for wanting to use my own money to chase a dream I'd been holding onto for years. Meanwhile, Noah was living off their handouts like it was his birthright. But my mom, oh, my mom. She said she was ashamed of me. I stared at her, speechless for a moment. I mean, the sheer audacity of it. Then came the ultimatum. My dad leaned forward, his tone cold and firm. "If you won't help the family, don't bother coming around anymore." Well, I wasn't stupid. I knew our relationship wasn't perfect, but to hear it laid out so bluntly, it felt like too much. Still, I couldn't give in. I had spent my entire life bending over backward for them, for Noah. And where had it gotten me? Nowhere. I stood up, heart pounding but voice steady, and said, "Fine, I'll leave." Their eyes widened, like they hadn't actually expected me to call their bluff. I went upstairs, grabbed a bag, and packed as much as I could fit. Clothes, personal stuff, a few keepsakes, whatever I could carry. My mom was crying in the hallway, mumbling something about how I was breaking up the family. My dad didn't say a word, just watched me with this disappointed glare, like I was the one ruining everything. I walked out the door that night and didn't look back. My new apartment was tiny, just one room, a kitchenette, and a bathroom that barely fit a shower, but it was mine. No guilt, No manipulation, no constant pressure to sacrifice myself for someone else's dreams. It wasn't much, but it felt like freedom. About a month later, they tried again. My mom called, all sweetness and light, acting like nothing had happened. She asked how I was doing and if I'd thought any more about helping the family. When I told her the answer was still no, she lost it. She said I was abandoning them, that Noah deserved this chance more than anyone, and that I'd regret being so cold-hearted. Then Noah started texting me. He didn't even try to hide his entitlement. "Bro, I need you to come through for me. Med school is expensive, and you're in a position to help. You know I'd do the same for you." I stared at that text for a good 5 minutes before laughing. I texted back, "You've never done anything for me, Noah. Why should I sacrifice everything for you now?" His response? "Wow, didn't know you were this petty." I was petty for wanting to keep the money I'd won, to build something for myself after years of being overlooked. It was almost funny the way they twisted everything to make me the bad guy. Almost. I thought blocking their numbers would give me some peace, but my family doesn't understand boundaries. It started small, subtle moves meant to corner me into submission. My aunt showed up unannounced at my boutique, acting like she was just in the neighborhood. She browsed for a bit, complimenting my work, and then casually brought up Noah. "He's under so much pressure, Ethan," she said, picking up a kid's hoodie like we were discussing the weather. "If you just help with his tuition, I know it would mean the world to your parents, and to him." I smiled tightly and thanked her for stopping by. That night, she called me a disgrace to the family in a Facebook post, which conveniently left out the part where I refused to be guilt-tripped. My parents weren't far behind. My mom made a grand show of accidentally leaving a family group chat open on her tablet during Sunday lunch at a relative's house. I wasn't there, of course, but I heard about it later. Apparently, the chat included messages about my lottery win, calling it a blessing for us all. My uncle told me she even zoomed in on the part where Noah had added, "Ethan's lucky. He's in a position to step up for his family." Then came the wedding stunt. My mom and dad decided to throw an elaborate engagement dinner for a family friend, and conveniently didn't invite me. I didn't find out until a neighbor congratulated me on Noah's generous sponsorship of the event. Turns out, they'd publicly announced that I had offered to cover the costs as a show of family unity. The entitlement didn't stop there. One day, I arrived home to find a gift basket on my doorstep. At first, I thought it was a sweet gesture from a client, but the note inside quickly cleared that up. "A little something to thank you in advance for your generosity with Noah's education fund. We're so proud of you, Ethan. Love, Mom and Dad." I threw the basket in the trash. The next week, my dad cornered me at my boutique, clipboard in hand. He had a full budget proposal for Noah's master's program, down to the last cent. "It's not just about the tuition," he explained, his tone businesslike, as if we were negotiating a loan. "Noah will need living expenses, study materials, travel costs. We don't want him distracted by money while he's pursuing his dream." My patience snapped. "No," I said, cutting him off mid-sentence. "This isn't a family crowdfunding event. The answer is no." His expression darkened, and he left without another word. 2 days later, I got a letter from a lawyer. It wasn't a lawsuit, thankfully, but it was a formal request, signed by my parents, asking me to consider a voluntary family financial agreement to support Noah's education and help pay off their mortgage. The audacity of it floored me. Still, the most outrageous moment came when my mom orchestrated what she called a family intervention. She roped in an old pastor from our community, who visited me at my boutique with Ryan in tow. The pastor opened with a prayer about unity and sacrifice. Noah just sat there, nodding solemnly, as if he were a saint instead of a freeloading disaster. When the pastor finished, my mom said, "Ethan, this is your chance to be a true blessing to your family." I couldn't even respond. I just walked away, leaving them standing there, bewildered. That evening, I changed the locks at my boutique. Meanwhile, my business was thriving. Orders were coming in, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was building something that truly mattered. But even with every success, I couldn't fully escape their shadow. It wasn't just their audacity. It was the way they truly believed I owed them everything. Not a loan, not a favor, but my entire future. Still, I reminded myself, I'd worked for this, I'd earned this, and I wasn't about to let them take it away. But my family wasn't done yet. About a month later, I was closing up the boutique when I heard a knock on the glass door. It was late, and I wasn't expecting anyone. I turned and froze when I saw my mom standing there, red-faced and clearly upset. Against my better judgment, I walked over and unlocked the door. "Mom, what are you doing here?" I asked. She stepped inside, wiping her eyes. "Ethan, I need to talk to you, please. It's not about money, it's about family." I crossed my arms and leaned against the counter, skeptical. "Okay, what's going on?" She hesitated, looking like she was trying to find the right words. Then she blurted out, "It's Noah, he's in trouble." I wasn't expecting that. "What kind of trouble?" "He's been arrested. The police raided his apartment and found stolen credit cards. He's been using them to buy expensive clothes, electronics, nights out. They're charging him with fraud." I closed my eyes for a moment, letting it sink in. Of course, Noah had managed to land himself in something like this. I should have seen it coming. "And now you're here because you want me to fix it," I said. She flinched like I'd slapped her. "We need your help. His bail is $15,000 and we don't have it. We can't afford a lawyer either. Please, Ethan, he's your brother. You can't let him go to jail." I stared at her, trying to process everything. Part of me wanted to laugh in disbelief. The other part wanted to scream, "Do you hear yourself?" "After everything you've put me through," I said, my voice rising, "you show up now, when he's in trouble, and expect me to fix it?" She clasped her hands together, her eyes desperate. "It's not like that, Ethan. He's your brother. He needs you." I shook my head, pacing behind the counter. "He doesn't need me. He needs to take responsibility for his actions. You've spent his whole life shielding him from consequences, and now look where that's gotten him." "Please," she whispered, "I'll pay you back. I swear." I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. "Pay me back? Really, Mom? We both know that's not going to happen." She looked down. As much as I wanted to slam the door on this mess, I couldn't quite bring myself to leave Noah in jail. Not entirely, anyway. "Fine," I said, my tone sharp. "I'll pay the bail. But here's how it's going to work. I'm sending the money directly to the bondsman. You're not touching a cent of it. And this is a one-time deal. If he screws up again, he's on his own." She nodded quickly, relief washing over her face. "Thank you, Ethan. Thank you." "Don't thank me," I yelled. "This isn't about you or Noah. This is me setting a boundary. One mistake, and that's it. Understood?" She hesitated for a moment, then finally said, "Understood." I walked her to the door without another word. As she stepped outside, I closed it firmly behind her and locked it. Watching her walk away, I felt a mix of emotions. I hated that I'd been dragged into their mess again, but at least this time, I'd done it on my terms. The next morning, I wired the money to the bondsman and blocked my mom's number. I didn't even bother telling Noah what I'd done. Let him think Mom and Dad had pulled off some miracle. I wasn't interested in being anyone's savior anymore. It wasn't long before I started hearing whispers from mutual acquaintances. Noah had made bail, but his legal troubles were far from over. My parents were still scrambling to figure out how to cover his lawyer fees, but I was done. No more bailouts, no more guilt trips, no more sacrificing my peace for a family that had never done the same for me. However, I honestly wanted to know what would happen to Noah. I was curious how he was going to save himself, since he didn't know anything other than playing the role of the spoiled kid. If anything new arose, I'd post it here for you guys, if you're interested. Update 1. Hey Reddit, it's been a while, but as promised, I'm back with an update. Turns out, I didn't have to wait long to see how things unfolded with Noah and my parents. And oh boy, it's been something. So, after bailing Noah out, I braced myself for more chaos. It felt inevitable with my family. But for a brief moment, there was silence. No emails, no calls, no guilt-laden texts. I'd almost convinced myself they were finally leaving me alone. 2 weeks after I wired the money to the bondsman, I got a text from an unknown number. It was Noah. No thanks. No acknowledgement of what I'd done for him. Instead, he wrote, "Hey, can you send over $5,000 for my lawyer? They say it'll help with my case." I stared at the message, completely dumbfounded. I just dropped $15,000 to get him out of jail, and now he was back with his hand out? It wasn't even a question. It was a demand, like I owed it to him. I didn't bother responding. I blocked the number and tried to focus on my business. My boutique had just opened its doors, and I was working 12-hour days to keep things running smoothly. I didn't have the bandwidth for Noah's nonsense, but my parents wouldn't let it go. A few days later, my mom sent a long, rambling email about how Noah was struggling, how the legal system was unfair, and how I was abandoning him in his time of need. She threw in a guilt-laden line about how she and my dad had sacrificed everything to give me a good life, and now it was my turn to repay them. For what? For years of being ignored, overlooked, and treated like Noah's backup plan? I didn't reply. I didn't even open the next email she sent, or the one after that. Things escalated quickly. My mom must have told Noah I wasn't budging because he started getting aggressive. I began hearing from mutual acquaintances, old friends, extended family, even a former teacher, telling me I should help my brother. Apparently, Noah had been spinning some sob story about how I was living it up with my lottery winnings while he was suffering. It pissed me off. Not just the lies, but the audacity. He'd never worked a day in his life for anything. Eventually, I heard through the grapevine that Noah's case wasn't going well. He'd refused a plea deal because he thought he could beat the charges. Classic Noah. Arrogant and entitled to the end. My parents were scrambling to find money for his legal fees. They'd already maxed out their credit cards and taken out a second mortgage on the house. Did I feel bad for them? Honestly, not really. They'd spent their whole lives enabling Noah, shielding him from the consequences of his actions. Now, they were finally seeing what happens when you let someone believe they're untouchable. A few weeks later, my aunt called with an update. Noah had been sentenced to 3 years in prison for fraud. She told me my parents were devastated, that my mom hadn't stopped crying since the verdict. She asked if I'd come visit them, maybe help them make sense of everything. I told her no, not out of spite, but because I'd finally learned my lesson. I couldn't fix this for them. And then, out of nowhere, just as I was starting to feel like life was back on track, I got an email from a local supplier I worked with for the boutique. They were severing ties with me, claiming they'd received disturbing reports about unethical practices in my business. Unethical practices. I'd built my boutique on honesty and transparency, and I knew this had to be some kind of mistake. I spent the next few days chasing down answers, only to discover the real culprit behind the smear campaign: Noah. Apparently, he'd been pulling strings from prison, feeding lies to suppliers, and even leaving fake reviews online to tarnish my reputation. A mutual acquaintance who still talked to my parents let it slip that Noah blamed me for his downfall. According to him, I'd refused to help him when he needed it most, and this was his way of getting even. I felt a mix of anger and disbelief. After everything he'd done, stealing from our family, taking advantage of my parents, and ending up in prison because of his own choices, he still thought he was the victim. And now he wanted to drag me down with him? The thing is, Noah underestimated me. He thought I'd crumble under pressure, that I'd fold the way I used to whenever my parents asked me to be the bigger person. Not this time. I'd worked too hard to let him ruin what I'd built. Final update. What's up, everyone? It's Ethan, and I'm back with an update. And yeah, it's a wild one. Remember when I told you how Noah wasn't content with just wrecking his own life, so he decided to take a shot at mine too? Well, here's the thing. When you come for me, you better be ready for what's coming back. Let me tell you how I turned the tables on him. I contacted my lawyer and laid out everything: emails, reviews, even the whispers I'd heard from mutual acquaintances, It wasn't long before we had enough to prove what he was doing. I sent a cease and desist letter to his prison and worked with the suppliers to clear my name. Some of them even apologized, realizing they'd been manipulated. It wasn't easy bouncing back from the hit to my reputation, but every victory felt sweeter knowing I'd fought for it myself. After Ryan was sentenced, I thought the nightmare was over. Nope. The calls didn't just continue, they got louder. The messages, guilt-laden and accusatory, piled up like debris from a storm I couldn't escape. My mom led the charge with her typical dramatic flair. Every voicemail was a symphony of sniffles and trembling words. "Do you even care what this has done to us? The house feels so empty without Noah. We barely sleep, Ethan." She painted herself as the martyr, throwing in the occasional jab for good measure. "You're punishing us for mistakes that weren't even that serious." Then my dad jumped in. His tone was colder, sharper. No theatrics, just straight-up anger. "Family is family," he said in one message. "You don't turn your back on us, Ethan. One day, you'll regret what you're doing. All for what? A boutique? You think that makes you better than us?" It didn't sting the way it used to. What hit me instead was the realization that they still didn't get it. I wasn't their son in their eyes. I was their last resort, their fixer. And now that Noah couldn't play the golden child anymore, they were determined to squeeze me dry. I was so tired. With all that shut down, about a month after Noah's sentencing, I was starting to feel like things were finally settling down. Then one morning, I opened my mailbox and found a letter with a prison return address. My chest tightened when I saw Noah's name scrawled on the envelope. At first, I considered throwing it straight in the trash. What could he possibly have to say that I hadn't already heard? Apologies laced with manipulation? A sob story designed to guilt me into sending him money. I was done with all of it. But something about that letter tugged at me. Whatever it was, I opened it. It started with a weak attempt at small talk. "I hope this letter finds you well," but quickly got to the point. Noah admitted he'd spent a lot of time thinking about what he'd done, not just to himself, but to me. He didn't try to justify his actions or shift the blame like he usually did. Instead, he laid it all out in stark honesty. "I've been jealous of you my whole life," he wrote. "I know it might not have looked like it on the surface, but I've always felt like you were everything I wasn't. You were the one with ambition, the one who actually built something for yourself. Mom and Dad might have coddled me, but I always knew they were prouder of you, and I hated it." Reading that stopped me cold. For years, I'd believed Noah thought he was untouchable, the golden child who could do no wrong. Hearing that he'd secretly envied me all along was like someone flipping a switch. It didn't erase the pain he'd caused, but it made me see him in a different light. Noah went on to confess that his jealousy had driven everything he'd done to hurt me. "When you wouldn't bail me out, it felt like proof that I was worthless," he wrote. "Instead of looking in the mirror and fixing myself, I lashed out at you. I thought if I could knock you down, it would make me feel better about my own failures. But all it did was ruin both of us." He even addressed the sabotage. "I know you know what I did to your business. I wanted to watch you fall. But seeing how you bounced back, it just reminded me of what I've never been able to do. I'm sorry, Ethan. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I needed you to know." The letter was raw in a way I wasn't used to from Noah. He didn't ask for anything. Not forgiveness, not money, not even a response. He ended by saying he was working on himself, trying to understand why he'd made the choices he did. "I don't expect you to ever want a relationship with me again," he wrote. "But I wanted to tell you the truth, for once." When I finished reading, I just sat there, staring at the letter. I'd spent so much of my life angry at Noah, frustrated by the way he manipulated everyone around him, hurt me, and always got away with it. This was the first time he'd taken any kind of responsibility for his actions. And while I wasn't ready to forgive him, I couldn't ignore the honesty in his words. I thought about everything he'd said for days. Part of me wanted to crumple the letter and toss it, to move on and never look back. But another part of me felt, I don't know, not sympathy exactly, but a flicker of understanding. Noah was a mess, but maybe, just maybe, he was starting to see that for himself. I haven't decided if I'll write back. For now, the letter is sitting in my desk drawer, a reminder of how deep wounds can go and how sometimes, even the people who've hurt you the most are battling demons of their own. I'm not sure where this will go, or if it'll go anywhere at all, but for the first time, Noah feels like less of a villain in my story and more like a cautionary tale. The weeks after receiving Noah's letter were a blur. I poured myself into my work, expanding the boutique, even launching a small online store. It was a whirlwind of activity, but it kept my mind occupied, kept me from dwelling on the past. My parents, thankfully, had quieted down. Maybe they'd finally realized that their tactics weren't working, or maybe they were just exhausted from dealing with Noah's legal troubles. Whatever the reason, the calls and emails stopped, and the guilt trips faded into the background. One evening, as I was closing up the boutique, my dad walked in. I hadn't seen him since the budget proposal incident, and I braced myself for another confrontation. But his demeanor was different this time. He looked tired, older somehow. "Ethan," he said, his voice weary, "can we talk?" I nodded, led him to a small seating area in the back of the boutique, and waited. He took a deep breath. I want to apologize," he said, his voice cracking. "For everything. For how we treated you. For how we pressured you. For how we always favored Noah." He looked up at me, his eyes filled with regret. "I know it's no excuse, but your mother and I, we always wanted the best for Noah. He struggled in school. He had trouble making friends. We thought if we gave him enough support, he'd find his way." He shook his head. "We were wrong. We coddled him. We made excuses for him, and we neglected you in the process. And for that, I'm truly sorry." I sat there, stunned. I'd never heard my dad speak so openly, so honestly. It was like a dam had broken, and years of suppressed emotions were finally pouring out. I don't know what to say," I admitted. He nodded. "I understand. It's okay. I wanted you to know that I see it now. I see how much we hurt you, and I regret it. I'm proud of you, Ethan. You've built a good life for yourself, despite everything. And I'm proud to call you my son." We sat in silence for a while, the weight of years of unspoken words hanging in the air. Then, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I hugged my dad. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation, but it was a start. A few weeks later, I got another letter from Noah. This one was shorter, less intense than the first. He thanked me for paying his bail, even though he hadn't deserved it. He said he was taking classes in prison, trying to get his life back on track. He also said he understood if I never wanted to see him again, but he hoped that maybe, someday, we could rebuild a relationship. I wrote back. I told him I wasn't ready to forgive him completely, but I was glad he was trying to make things right. I also told him about my dad's apology and how it felt like things were finally changing in our family. We exchanged a few more letters over the next few months. Noah's letters were filled with reflections on his past mistakes and his hopes for the future. He talked about wanting to be a better person, a better brother. I didn't always know how to respond, but I kept writing back. It felt good to have this unexpected connection with my brother, even if it was from a distance. One day, I got a call from my mom. She told me Noah was being released early for good behavior. She asked if I'd be willing to meet him when he got out. I hesitated. I wasn't sure if I was ready for that. But then I thought about how far Noah had come, how much he'd changed. And I thought about my dad, and how much it would mean to him to see his sons reunited. So, I said yes. The day Noah got out, I went to my parents' house. It was awkward at first. We were all a little unsure of how to act around each other. But then Noah looked at me, his eyes filled with sincerity, and said, "Ethan, I'm so sorry for everything. I know I messed up, but I'm going to make things right. I promise. And in that moment, I knew he meant it. We hugged, and it felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. It's been a year since Noah got out of prison. He's been working hard to rebuild his life. He got a job, he's paying off his debts, and he's even taking some night classes. He's not perfect, but he's trying. And that's all that matters. Our relationship isn't what it used to be. We're not best friends, but we're brothers. We talk regularly, we hang out sometimes, and we're there for each other when it counts. As for my parents, they've finally learned their lesson. They're no longer trying to control my life or dictate my choices. They're just happy to have their family back together. My life isn't perfect, but it's mine. I have a successful business, a loving family, a real one this time, and a newfound sense of peace. I'm no longer the afterthought, the backup plan. I'm Ethan, and I'm finally living my life on my own terms. And that, Reddit, is a winning ticket worth more than any lottery prize story, too. Hello, I'm a 29-year-old man, and the subject of my narrative is my family, which I characterize as tight yet occasionally draining. We had ups and downs like any other family as we were growing up. However, as I've grown older, I've realized that the dynamics are not at all balanced. As the self-appointed matriarch, my mother enjoys being engaged in every aspect of life. Even when it's not required desired, she has a talent for micromanaging. Then there's Rachel, my elder sister. She has always been the golden kid and is currently 32. According to Mom, Rachel is the kind of person who can't do anything wrong. Eric, my 26-year-old younger brother, is the complete opposite. He avoids drama wherever possible and remains impartial in most circumstances. I've felt in the center all my life. While never quite reaching Rachel's level of perfection, Eric doesn't appear to cruise through life as comfortably. My mom decided to have a family get-together to honor my dad's recent retirement. She didn't solicit opinions. She announced that it was taking place, and that was that. Since she likes to be in charge of every little detail, she made sure to constantly remind us of the time, date, and how crucial it was that everyone behave themselves. I've attended enough family gatherings to understand that the proper behavior is to avoid making Mom look terrible. The days before the celebration were stressful. Mom always calls Rachel and me individually to discuss our relationship, and this time was no exception. She asked me what I was bringing after mentioning that Rachel had discovered the ideal present for Dad. I informed her that I had been creating a scrapbook featuring my father's most notable professional moments. After a lengthy silence, she said, "I'm sure he'll appreciate the effort." The translation is inadequate. An costly watch ended up being Rachel's gift. Mom was constantly talking about it, and even before the party began, I could sense the similarities developing. I was a touch behind schedule on the day of the event. I took additional care to make sure my present was ideal, not because I wanted to be. I was met with smiles that stopped short of eyeballs as I entered my parents' home. The first to say anything was Mom, who remarked nonchalantly that everyone else had arrived on schedule. Like I normally do, I ignored it and gave my present to be put with the others. It was the expected vibe. Polite small talk concealing a layer of anxiety that cannot be spoken. There were already Rachel and Eric, and Rachel had positioned herself as Mom's right-hand aide as usual. In an apparent attempt to blend in, Eric was seated off to the side, browsing through his phone. Mom made care to tell us that she had made the supper from scratch before we ate it. It was time for the presents after that. First to be seen was Rachel's watch. Mom made sure everyone knew how carefully Rachel had chosen it, and it arrived in a stylish package. There was a wave of applause from the table as Dad thanked her and put it on right away. It was then my time. The scrapbook was full with photos, newspaper clippings, and brief comments from people Dad had worked with throughout the years, I said as I gave it them. As he turned the pages, Dad appeared truly moved, but Mom's face spoke for itself. "It's quite emotional," she added with a tight smile. Rachel's gift was met with a lackluster reception. Things took an odd turn after the presents. Mom abruptly declared that there was no $500 cash in an envelope, which was presumably part of Rachel's present. It had been sitting in the kitchen before, but she made a great deal out of the fact that it was now missing. Everyone began to glance around, but her tone made it obvious who she believed was to blame. Mom gently brought up my past financial difficulties, mentioning a difficult time in college when I had to borrow money from my parents. The inference was clear enough for everyone to hear, even if she didn't blame me directly. Rachel made things worse. She said that it was strange that I would appear anxious when I got there. Although Eric remained silent, I could sense that everyone was watching me. I was taken aback. The envelope had not even been touched by me. Heck, until my mother mentioned it, I had no idea it existed. I mentioned that I didn't have a chance to take anything and that I had only brought my wrapped present. Mom wasn't letting up, though. She said that it had to be me because she simply knew the money was gone. Suspicion was heavily in the room. My dad didn't say anything to support me, but I could see he was uncomfortable. The situation was exacerbated by Rachel's constant remarks about how regrettable it was. By this time, I understood that words alone would not persuade anyone. Fortunately, I had the proof I needed. I took out my phone, prepared to demonstrate my precise location and activities for the day. Update. Aside from the sound of my phone unlocking, the room was completely silent. With all eyes on me, I got up and politely requested that everyone take a seat. I made the decision to confront this claim directly, since it was obvious that it would not go away on its own. Mom attempted to brush it off right away, saying we didn't need to make a big deal out of it. But if she wanted to accuse me in front of everyone, I wasn't going to allow her. We were then going to deal with this in public. I began by launching my app for budgeting. I had been tracking every single cost with it meticulously for the past year. I never imagined it would be useful for anything like this, but it was going to save my life. I showed everyone what I had bought earlier in the day, gas for my vehicle, and a short early shopping run. Nothing was missing, and there were no significant lapses in time that were inexplicable. In order to demonstrate that all of my accounts were in order, I also launched my bank app. My financial situation didn't shout that I was desperate enough to steal. I didn't stop there, though. I opened the location history on my phone. It revealed that I had made no stops along the way from my flat to my parents' residence. I couldn't have grabbed the package without leaving a trail or getting caught on video someplace. I demonstrated to them that I had done nothing suspicious by showing them the GPS spots and timestamps. Eric, who had remained silent until now, opened his mouth. He stated that he didn't see how I could have taken anything and that the evidence appeared to be reliable. A few cousins muttered that they agreed. Mom wasn't prepared to let it go, even if it briefly appeared that things were going my way. Receipts and GPS tracking didn't prove anything, she remarked, leaning back in her chair and crossing her arms. It wasn't about the money, she explained. The point was that I had always been cunning, and that this type of conduct wasn't unusual for me. Rachel rushed in to support her, claiming that I seemed guilty and that I was behaving strangely defensive. That was the last straw. I made it plain that I wasn't being defensive and held my ground. I was defending myself against an unfounded charge. They needed concrete evidence, not just their mother's intuition, if they were going to make such a severe accusation against me. Dad, who had remained largely silent, suddenly spoke out at this time. He questioned Mom and Rachel directly whether they had any concrete proof that I was involved, and if they were certain the envelope had gone missing at all. After some hesitation, Rachel confessed that she had given the envelope to her mother earlier in the day so she could keep it secure. Everyone looked to their mother, anticipating an explanation. Despite her apparent surprise, Mom grudgingly consented to look for the mail. She recommended that we divide up and inspect various areas of the house. Thus, we took that action. People began searching the garbage, behind sofas and inside drawers. I watched Mom while we looked, since I wasn't sure the envelope was missing in the first place. It was not long before I noticed anything odd. Mom was looking about as if she didn't want anyone to notice her loitering close to her handbag. She zipped it back again after opening it just a crack and taking a short look inside. My intuition urged me to investigate. As I approached, I noticed a white envelope protruding from the side pocket. I grabbed it, took it out, and held it up so everyone could see it. Rachel's handwriting was on the front of the lost envelope. There was utter silence in the room. Mom blurted out an apology, her cheeks flushed. She said that she must have forgotten about it earlier when she had placed it in her handbag. If she had kept the envelope the entire time, it would not have added up. Why would you say I stole it? Despite her astonished expression, Rachel remained silent. She seemed to have lost her sense of what to believe. At first, everyone was too astonished to speak. A few relatives shook their heads in shock while Eric gave me a look that indicated, "I knew it wasn't you." Dad seemed dissatisfied, but I wasn't sure if it was directed at Mom or the circumstances in general. After that, I left shortly after. I gathered my belongings and informed them that I was going. I heard Mom attempting to explain herself as I was leaving, but I didn't remain to hear. By the time I reached my car, I had finished the entire scene. I felt the weight of it all. Even though I had demonstrated my innocence, it didn't seem like a win. My own family members, not outsiders, had accused me of something terrible. I knew this wasn't the end, even when I found the envelope. I had a feeling that the consequences of this evening were only beginning. Update 2. I replayed everything that had transpired for the remainder of the evening after leaving the party. A part of me questioned whether my departure was an overreaction, but I couldn't get rid of the annoyance every time I imagined my mother blaming me in front of everyone. Although I had shown myself to be innocent, the harm had already been done. The envelope was no longer the issue. It had to do with trust, or the absence of it. Eric sent me a text the following morning, and my phone buzzed. I was shocked when he contacted me because he doesn't usually get involved in family issues. He claimed that I had been justified in defending myself, and that he thought Mom's handling of the situation was totally inappropriate. Even that small gesture felt like support, and he had little else to say. Rachel, on the other hand, was a completely different story. One of my cousins sent me a screenshot of her most recent social media post, but I don't follow her. It was one of those evasive, passive-aggressive updates about how some people can't let go of things and how family drama ruined special moments. Although she didn't mention names, it was clear who she was referring to. Mom wasn't going to let me ignore it and move on, even though I had made up my mind to do so. Later that day, she texted me to say that I had overreacted by leaving and that the entire situation was a misunderstanding. She continued to talk about how I had embarrassed her in front of the family by making a scene. It was the quintessential mother manipulating the situation to put herself at fault. I didn't even try to answer. What shocked me most was Dad's silence. When Mom goes too far, he usually tries to make things better, but I hadn't heard from him. I couldn't tell if he was trying to avoid the situation or if he was simply at a loss for words. In any case, it made me feel isolated. I discussed it with a few close friends, who were quick to label the situation as absurd. I should have recorded the entire exchange and posted it online. One of them even joked. They made it clear to me that I had good reason to be frustrated and that I was right to defend myself. Other family members who attended the event began to contact me later that week. Some of my cousins texted me to express their support and to say they couldn't believe what had happened. One even talked about how embarrassing it had been for me to be accused by my mother, especially since I had obviously been innocent. Although it was comforting to know that some family members supported me, it also made me aware of how shattered things had become. Rachel then gave a call. Even though I didn't want to answer, I reasoned that avoiding her would only make matters worse. She wasted no time in accusing me of purposefully embarrassing my mother. She continued by saying that I had overreacted by leaving, and that Mom had simply been under stress. Remaining composed, I informed her that I would not put up with this type of gaslighting. She made an attempt to argue, but I cut her off before she could say much more. I soon began to hear from more members of my extended family. Mom seemed to be spreading her own version of events, accusing me of being spiteful and claiming that I would use the envelope incident as a pretext to make fun of her. It was frustrating, but I didn't feel the need to respond if people wanted to believe her. They made that decision. A couple of days later, Dad finally called. He began by expressing regret for not intervening during the celebration, stating that he didn't want to exacerbate the situation at that time. Then he asked if I could find it in me to be the bigger person and move past it for the sake of the family. I told him I wasn't interested in pretending everything was fine just to keep the peace. I made it clear that I wouldn't attend any future gatherings unless Mom apologized and made an effort to change. He sounded disappointed, but didn't push the issue. Feeling overwhelmed, I decided to share the story online. I didn't name anyone or include identifying details, but I needed a place to vent. The reaction was tremendous. Thousands of people commented, sharing their own stories of toxic family dynamics and offering support. It was validating to see so many strangers understand where I was coming from. As I read through the comments, I started to rethink my relationship with my family. I wasn't ready to cut ties completely, but I knew something had to change. I couldn't keep putting myself in situations where I was made to feel like the villain for no reason. Going low contact with Mom and Rachel seemed like the best option for now. Just when I thought things had settled down, my phone rang again. This time it was Mom. She said she wanted to meet in person to talk things out. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I agreed. If nothing else, it would give me a chance to set some boundaries and make it clear that I wasn't going to let this happen again. Update 3: Mom wanted to meet at a local coffee shop, which I agreed to because it felt neutral enough. The idea of sitting down with her at her house, where she'd have the home field advantage, didn't sit right with me. When I arrived, she was already there, sipping a latte with that tight, forced smile she puts on when she's trying to smooth things over. As soon as I sat down, she resumed talking like nothing bad had occurred. She commented how the coffee shop had outstanding ratings, inquired how my week had been, and then casually added, "I believe we should just get beyond all this." It was like she wanted to sweep everything under the floor and pretend the allegation, the drama, and the finding of the envelope never occurred. I didn't let her set the tone. I made it obvious from the start that I wasn't there to play along or allow her diminish what had transpired. I told her I was prepared to listen, but I wasn't going to take any gaslighting or efforts to transfer the blame or grin faltered a bit, but she immediately recovered and resumed talking. She said the whole incident had been a misunderstanding. She stated she'd been anxious from organizing the party and overreacted when the envelope went missing. According to her, it was all a mix-up, and she never meant to hurt me. It was an excuse I may have accepted if it weren't for the part where the envelope was found in her handbag. I pressed her on it. I questioned her point blank how the envelope came up there, and why she was so ready to accuse me of theft. She skirted the subject at first, stating it didn't matter anymore, because everything had been discovered. I didn't let it go, though. I informed her that if we were ever going to proceed, I had to know the truth. Then she made a mistake. She acknowledged that she intended to discipline me because she had a suspicion that I would make a mistake again due to my previous financial difficulties. When she stated it like she had intended, her voice trailed off. It would be less surprising if it were said gently. This wasn't a misunderstanding at all, and I sat there in shock. It was intentional. She continued by defending her actions by claiming that Rachel deserved her present after everything she had done for the family, and that she was simply attempting to safeguard it. It seems that Rachel's sacrifices and hard work increased the value of her present, and her mother didn't want anything to happen to it. She obviously believed that this justification would somehow justify her behavior. I brought up how embarrassing and painful it was to be accused of me in front of the whole family, not just in private. I told her that even after I proved my innocence, she refused to back down, and that my dad, my cousins, and everyone else were present when she said I had stolen money. What did she say? A half-hearted, ambiguous apology. "If you were offended, I apologize." That was insufficient. I informed her up front that such an apology was meaningless. She didn't feel bad about what she had done. She regretted being discovered. I began to enumerate further instances in which she mistreated me or made comparisons between myself and Rachel. Provide background information to show that this was not a singular occurrence. As I anticipated, her response was defensive. She suggested I should let things go if I wanted the family to be together, and accused me of harboring resentment. She then attempted to change the course of events by claiming that I was the one destroying the family by not forgiving her and Rachel. I remained composed and informed her that unless there was a sincere apology and a noticeable attempt to change, I would no longer be attending family events. I had no desire to keep attending events where I would be viewed as the issue. She began using guilt tripping at that point. "This family needs you," she added. "And do you really want to split us up like this?" When it was obvious that I wasn't going to back down, it was difficult not to chuckle at the absurdity of her attempting to blame me for the turmoil in the family. Her voice changed once again. She began by discussing how difficult it was to maintain harmony within the family and how she never intended to cause harm to anybody. However, the harm had already been done. There wasn't much more I could say until she was prepared to take responsibility for her behavior and make significant adjustments. But I did tell her that I appreciated her taking the time to meet. She didn't stop me as I stood up to depart. She was still sitting there, stirring her drink as if she were lost in contemplation, when I left. Perhaps she recognized the seriousness of her error, or perhaps she had already decided what to do next. In any case, I was exhausted. I had made my limits clear and said what I needed to say, but it didn't seem like much of a victory. It was, if anything, the start of a much longer battle. The fourth update. The consequences of the coffee shop meeting with Mom quickly became apparent. Rachel contacted me enraged the next day. She was furious that I had gone up to Mom and accused her of destroying everything. She said that I was being theatrical about a small mistake and that Mom was distraught. I listened to her tirade for a long before interrupting to declare that unless Mom accepted responsibility, I would not be attending family events. Rachel wasn't pleased and accused me of being self-centered and focusing only on myself. Before the conversation got out of hand, I quietly terminated it. Dad called later that night, more neutral, even wary, as if he didn't want to set off any landmines was his tone. He acknowledged that what Mom did was terrible and that he could see why I was unhappy, but he wished there was a way to go on without all the conflict. I informed him that while I had nothing against reconciliation, it required a sincere apology and a significant shift in conduct. I could see he wasn't pleased with my position, even though he didn't push back. Rachel, meanwhile, returned to social media. This time, she shared a series of ambiguous updates about how some people thrive on conflict and how awful it is when family strife is shown publicly. Although she never called me by name, it was clear who she was referring to. Supportive remarks from a couple of her pals simply served to fan the flames. One of my cousins emailed me screenshots with the comment, "This is so childish," but I chose to ignore it. The extended family was beginning to become involved. Speaking of cousins, I started receiving direct messages from aunts, uncles, and cousins. Some expressed their support by expressing shock at what their mother had done. Others adopted a more unbiased approach, advising me to go on and forgive in order to preserve family harmony. I told some of them that this was about more than one occurrence. It dealt with a history of unequal treatment and partiality. It was obvious that not everyone was on my side, but the majority of them seemed to understand. Specifically, Rachel was intensifying her story. She began exaggerating everything to attract attention and telling anybody who would listen that I was envious of her connection with her mother. Rachel was playing the victim part perfectly, and the golden child story was in full force. Even though I wasn't shocked, it still annoyed me when she misrepresented the facts. But then Eric secretly contacted me. He said that he had been aware of the bias for years, but had chosen to remain neutral in order to prevent confrontation. Although he didn't say much, it meant a lot to me that he understood what was going on and stood by me. I had the impression that I wasn't the only one going through this. When Rachel made the decision to air her complaints in the family group chat, things took a different turn. She wrote a lengthy, heartfelt essay in which she accused me of wanting to split the family apart and blamed me for the conflict. Exaggerated and theatrical, it undoubtedly elicited a response. Arguments broke out on the chat, with family members picking sides and even accusing Rachel of being deceptive. It was time for me to tell my side of the story. I explained what had transpired at the party and how my mother had falsely accused me, keeping my explanation straightforward and factual. I also brought up her admission that she wanted to discipline me in the coffee shop. Many folks looked shocked by that portion. After that, There was a pause in conversation, but Mom quickly interrupted. She said that she never intended to accuse me of anything and disputed everything, saying I had misinterpreted her intentions. At this point, Dad attempted to intervene, urging everyone to put an end to the drama and move on, but I was irritated by his lack of forceful backing. He seemed more concerned with maintaining order than dealing with the reality of what had transpired. I remained silent after that. Not much more could be said. There were divisions among the extended family. Some publicly backed me up, stating that they had previously observed Mom's conduct, but had never imagined it would get this bad. Some even pledged to face her head-on. Others said I should stop worrying about it, and that I was overreacting, siding with Mom and Rachel. To put it mildly, it was a mess. Amidst all of this, one of my cousins sent me an anonymous email. Although they had never mentioned it, they acknowledged that they had also been harmed by their mother's actions over the years. They related a few particular instances that reflected my own, and inspired me to continue refusing to back down. Knowing that I wasn't the only one who had experienced this was reassuring. I began to feel more certain about my decision to set boundaries as the days passed. I was able to realize that I wasn't incorrect to demand accountability, thanks to the encouragement of some of my family members and even complete strangers on the internet. If anything, it strengthened my resolve to maintain my position. This was more than the party or the envelope. It had to do with saying enough after years of unfair treatment. Things were going to change, starting with me, whether Mom and Rachel wanted to acknowledge it or not. Update 5. A week after the drama in the group chat subsided, I got a surprise letter from my mother in the mail. It was handwritten. It was a very traditional move, in stark contrast to her custom of sending brief texts or making drawn-out phone calls. An apology was made at the start of the letter. She confessed that her actions at the event were inappropriate and that she had falsely accused me. She said that she regretted the way things turned out and that she had let her stress to overcome her. I wasn't sure how to interpret it at first. On the one hand, it was good to see that her deeds were somewhat acknowledged. However, I couldn't help but question whether this was more about maintaining our appearance than actually repairing our relationship. With so many members of the family taking sides, I wouldn't rule out Mom trying to repair the damage since she values her reputation. It wasn't made any easier by Rachel. In some way, how she quickly dismissed the letter as a ploy after learning about it. She said that I was destroying the family, and that her mother was only sending letters because she was at a loss for things. Rachel was playing the victim and doubling down in a classic way. During one of our talks, I brought up the letter to Eric. He claimed that while he wasn't shocked, he did believe that Mom may actually feel bad. Even if the letter wasn't flawless, he noted that she has trouble expressing herself clearly, and that it may be her attempt to make things right. I still wasn't prepared to lower my defenses, but it offered me something to think about. At this point, I began to give some real thought to a family therapy recommendation I had heard online. I mentioned it to my mother over the phone, presenting it as a means for all of us to proceed without continuously bringing up the same points of contention. She hesitated, saying that we should figure things out on our own and that treatment wasn't required. However, I remained steadfast, and to my amazement, my father supported me. According to him, we may be able to address the underlying problems that have been simmering beneath the surface for years with the help of therapy. In the meanwhile, I received another call from the relative who had written me the anonymous email. They talked candidly about their own encounters with their mother's partiality and the impact it had on them. It was somehow reassuring to hear their experiences. I was not the only one who had seen these trends. They had also caused harm to others. More family members started to support me as news got out. Some even confronted Mom personally, pleading with her to accept accountability for her behavior. With sufficient coercion from Dad and other relatives, at last, Mom consented to go to therapy. The initial meeting was heated, particularly when the therapist began discussing patterns of partiality. Mom became defensive. She made a number of deflections, such as, "I didn't mean for it to come across that way," or "I was just trying to keep the peace." However, the therapist did not absolve her. They explained out, politely but forcefully, how her behavior had harmed not only me, but the entire family dynamic. Naturally, Rachel protested at every turn. She accused me of overanalyzing everything and rejected the notion that Mom treated us unfairly. Despite the frustration, I concentrated on my own path. My sentiments were acknowledged by the therapist, who emphasized that establishing boundaries was not only acceptable, but also essential. Things started to change during the course of the next sessions. Mom began to talk about some of her personal fears and how they had affected her actions. She acknowledged that she had always been under pressure to maintain the family's unity, and that, since I was more difficult to control than Rachel, she occasionally vented her frustrations on me. Although it wasn't an excuse, it was the first time she had given herself a critical examination. The pivotal moment occurred when Mom started crying during one session. She offered a sincere apology rather than a nebulous, half-hearted one. She expressed her desire to improve and admitted the hurt she had caused me at the event and throughout the years. Rachel seems taken aback by the intensity of her feelings. Although I wasn't prepared to forgive everything at the time, it felt like a step in the right direction. I think Mom was actually attempting to change for the first time. Though it offered me hope for the future, it did not erase the past. We have been gradually repairing our connection ever since. I use caution, ensuring open communication and responsibility at every stage. Even if I'm avoiding her, Rachel is still Rachel, and I've observed that she's more reserved about the matter these days. Reminding me that it's acceptable to go at my own speed, Eric has been a silent but dependable supporter. Although it's a beginning, the resolution isn't flawless. I'm keeping my limits in place and concentrating on the success we've achieved thus far. At the very least, this experience has taught me the value of advocating for myself and the effectiveness of establishing boundaries with even the closest family members. Story 3. My birthday has always been seen as an afterthought in my family, and I'm a 25-year-old man. I find it depressing, but my buddies have practically made it a running joke. I witnessed the favoritism in my family firsthand as a child, since I had 2 siblings whose birthdays were always honored, as if they were national holidays. It followed the same pattern each year. Even if you weren't into anything they got, my sister, who is 3 years younger, and my brother, who is 2 years older, always had the best balloons, personalized cakes, themed parties, and presents that made you envious. I'd receive a final minute in the interim, "Oh, if I'm lucky, let's go to the grocery shop and get a cake," and they would completely forget if I wasn't. The first time I became aware of a problem, I was 8 years old. Since my brother had recently celebrated his 10th birthday, with an incredible week-long celebration, I had been anticipating a little party that year. He received an extravagant party with a superhero theme, complete with costumes, party goodies, and a magician. Although I didn't anticipate something that large, I did anticipate a cake. Nothing when the day arrived. No balloons, no cake, and no reference to my birthday. I waited for someone to speak throughout supper, but instead my parents discussed my brother's most recent soccer match. My mom dismissed my question about if they had forgotten, stating that they had been busy and would make it up to me the next year. Warning, they didn't. The same justifications were made each year following that. "We're really busy. Birthdays don't really matter. Next weekend, we'll celebrate." Next weekend never arrived for some reason. By high school, I had given up on having any expectations. I would save up what little money I had and treat myself to a video game, a book, or anything I was interested in at the moment. In my heart, it hurt, but I convinced myself I didn't care. Naturally, this issue did not affect my siblings. In addition to a live band, a bespoke outfit, and even a professional photographer, my sister's Sweet 16 looked like it was from a movie. The expense didn't faze my folks. On my 16th birthday, I received a text message that read, "Happy birthday, we love you." That was the end of it. That year, my friends realized my parents wouldn't be doing anything, so they threw me a tiny surprise party. Although it was one of my favorite birthdays, it also brought home the stark differences in how my family treated me. I attempted to make things better throughout the years. I would offer minor arrangements, like going out to supper, or I would remind my parents weeks in advance. They would occasionally agree, but when something more significant arose, the arrangements would fall through. A family friend's anniversary, my sister's admittance to college, and my brother's promotion. The last thing on the priority list was always my birthday. I eventually just quit up. However, I felt I'd had enough this year. No more getting passed over. No more justifications. I wanted them to be unable to ignore what I had to say. After a few years of working as a graphic designer, I have accumulated a respectable sum of savings. Why not do something for myself with part of that money, I thought. I would celebrate myself and make it so huge that they would have no option but to notice if they weren't going to celebrate me. I got to work coming up with ideas. I considered what would have the most impact, a luxury watch or a new automobile. It didn't seem right. Then it dawned on me. An opulent family vacation, something so ostentatious that it would be hard to ignore. I'd organized everything, paid for everything in advance, and then given it to myself as a present. The twist? In order to make it obvious that this was about taking back my birthdays, I would present it as a present for the entire family. My close friends enthusiastically supported the concept after I presented it to them. After witnessing my family's treatment of me over the years, they believed it was time for me to advocate for myself. To record my parents' responses, one of them even proposed recording the surprise. I loved the notion of making it a memorable occasion, but I wasn't sure about that. I began sowing seedlings throughout the ensuing weeks. I mentioned in passing to several family members that I had a special birthday celebration planned. As usual, my parents didn't appear to notice. My brother's job updates and my sister's most recent vacation pictures filled the family group chat. Not even a reference to my birthday. Now that the preparations were set and the big day was coming up, it was almost comical. I had a mixture of nervousness and exhilaration. This was about making a message, not simply about the trip. My birthday wouldn't be disregarded for once. I would ensure it. As the day drew nearer, I began foreshadowing a big revelation on social media by leaving clues. My pals cooperated. To top it all off, my family naturally didn't know. Everything was going to be different this year. It was more than simply my birthday. I was creating something memorable by reclaiming years of neglect. There would be no words to describe what I had prepared for my family. One update. As my birthday drew near, I began to observe my family's behavior more closely. I wasn't shocked that it wasn't mentioned at all. Nothing, no plans, no texts. For them, it was just another week, but the conversation in the family group was lively. Of course, it's not about me. My brother was discussing his promotion celebration. As it happened, he had planned it for the week of my birthday. Normal. He was being hyped up by everyone in the conversation, who congratulated him and inquired about the party's specifics. My birthday? No footnote at all. I was fully committed to my strategy now. The centerpiece, a lavish family cruise package, was previously booked by me. Nor was it an ordinary cruise. This included personalized tours, fine food, and luxurious balconies. I didn't care, even though it took a significant portion of my funds. This was more than simply a birthday present for me. This was my way of telling you that you could no longer ignore me. I got to work on the reveal when the booking was completed. I wanted it to be an unforgettable occasion. I organized meals, booked a modest space, and even created a video presentation on the journey. The whole affair was excellent, according to my buddies. Ever since I shared the plan with them, they had been encouraging me. Some of them even volunteered to assist with the setup, and I accepted with pleasure. I then distributed invites. I clarified that this was not your typical birthday celebration. It was a unique festivity. I excluded my parents and siblings, but invited certain members of my extended family who had always been nice to me. I wanted them to learn about it later, not because I didn't want them to come. I was aware that would irritate them. Next were the teases on social media. I made hazy updates. I can't wait to tell everyone about the big announcement that is coming up. My pals added to the excitement by leaving remarks. My sister, meantime, became inquisitive. I nonchalantly played off my sister's question about my birthday plans. My brother didn't appear to notice or care because he was too preoccupied with his promotion celebration. My parents called the day before my birthday, but it wasn't about me. We were on the phone when they asked if I could bring something to my brother's celebration. In passing, I inquired as to whether they had any arrangements for my birthday. They hesitated. Evidently taken aback, he muttered something about how, if there's time, we could definitely have supper. I smiled as I hung up, thanking them for allowing me manage the day. They were unaware of what was about to happen. I completed everything for the unveiling that night. Details of the cruise package were prepared. The location was prepared, and the video presentation looked flawless. A few questions began to surface. Was this excessive? Would it backfire? However, every time I doubt myself, I remember all the birthdays I've had by myself, waiting for a kind person. I was reassured by my pals that I was doing appropriately. This wasn't just about the cruise, they reminded me. To add a bit more flair, I decided to stand up for myself. That evening, with fewer than 24 hours to go, I put up a countdown timer on social media. Friends and even inquisitive family members asked what it was about in the comments that poured in. I didn't answer. Allowing the tension to rise, knowing that tomorrow will be a game changer, I went to bed. The scene was prepared. Even though my family wasn't aware of it yet, they will always remember this birthday. On the morning of my birthday, I awoke to just what I had anticipated. Quiet. No calls, no texts. For my family, nothing. In contrast, my pals didn't skip a beat. Immediately after midnight, messages began to flood in. Others excited me about the celebration, while others texted jokes about how this was finally my year. The day got off to a wonderful start. I went to the location to be ready for the big reveal after having a short breakfast. My pals were already there, assisting with the setup of the presentation and decorating. The room looked stunning, understated yet elegant, and had a backdrop that was ideal for pictures. A screen in the front had the video presentation loaded and ready to go. Tiny party goodies were on display on a side table. I had been ready for the visitors. Everything was spot on. The mood was lively by the time the first visitors began to arrive. Inquisitive about the purpose of this unique party, my aunts, uncles, and several cousins arrived. They mixed together, made assumptions, and asked me what was happening, but I kept them guessing. It was wonderful to be surrounded by people who genuinely cared, and the atmosphere was lighthearted and enjoyable. My phone buzzed in the middle of the day, the first indication that my folks were up. The wording was a straightforward, basic happy birthday. No effort, no punctuation. I said thank you in a kind manner. That was the end of the matter. In the meantime, my siblings were occupied with social media posts. My sister posted selfies after an outing, while my brother posted pictures from organizing his promotion party. As the venue grew, neither of them brought up my birthday. The big event was about to begin. I was at the front, gazing out at the group of friends and extended family. I began by giving a brief speech, in which I thanked everyone for attending, and briefly explained the purpose of the gathering. I didn't hold back. I discussed how birthdays had always been a source of pain for me, how I frequently felt ignored, and how I wanted to alter that this year. As I talked, the room fell silent, and I noticed a few family members nodding in agreement, obviously understanding my point of view. Then the moment arrived. I pressed play on the video presentation, which opened with pictures of previous birthdays, empty tables, cakes from the grocery store, and other mementos of the drab parties I'd attended. A glimpse of the opulent family trip followed the video's changeover. Images of the ship, the locations, and the activities that I had reserved flickered over the screen, sending me a last message that said, "Happy birthday. I celebrate like this." Applause broke out throughout the room. While some of my family whispered to each other, others were truly amazed, obviously taken by surprise. Some approached me to give me hugs and expressed their pride in me for taking such a risk. My pals who had been involved in the scheme were beaming broadly. However, not everyone was overjoyed. I observed that my parents and siblings had begun to see the party's social media posts. My mother said something about how proud she was of me in a remark on one of the pictures within minutes. She seemed to be attempting to preserve face, and it felt forced and uncomfortable. My siblings texted me individually after remaining silent online. My brother mockingly commended me for creating a scene, while my sister considered the entire situation a bit excessive. However, the extended family was not holding back. A few of them drew me aside to discuss their opinions on my parents' actions. Some even related their personal experiences of being overlooked or undervalued by them over time. It was somewhat depressing, but it was also eye-opening. I came to the realization that this dynamic was not unique to me. I spent some time with my friends as the celebration came to a conclusion, and we raised a glass to its success. They had been my staunchest allies during this ordeal, and without them, I couldn't have succeeded. We all realized this wasn't about the vacation, but one of them made the lighthearted suggestion that I make the cruise an annual event. It was about being heard and seen at last. My phone was overflowing with alerts by the end of the night. Friends, relatives, and even some coworkers who had learned about the party were leaving comments on the pictures and videos. However, my siblings and parents were conspicuously missing from the online discussion. I sat down and went through the posts once more after I got home. One thing was evident despite the range of responses, including surprise, support, and a hint of jealousy. I had gotten my point across. My birthday wasn't just an obscure date on the calendar for the first time in years. It was a memorable day. The third update, my phone was buzzing constantly when I woke up the morning after the party. After being quiet about my birthday for days, my family group chat suddenly became very active. My parents and siblings were obviously upset after seeing the event's pictures and videos. My mother sent the first message. She said it was unfair that such a significant decision was made without consulting everyone, and demanded a family meeting to discuss the cruise. Shortly after, my father added that the trip ought to have been a family endeavor. Neither did my siblings hold back. My sister claimed the entire situation was unnecessary and excessive, while my brother accused me of purposefully omitting them to harm their reputation. I didn't reply right away after reading the texts. Rather, I provided a screenshot of the family group chat from a week ago, where everyone was ignoring my birthday and talking about my brother's promotion party. I added a caption. I offered everyone the opportunity to organize anything, but nobody took the time to do so. This is what I did for myself. That didn't go over well. My brother retaliated, accusing me of exaggerating the situation and attempting to paint him as the bad one. My sister called me attention-seeking and accused me of excluding them on purpose. My parents tried to shift the narrative, saying I had misunderstood their intentions over the years. My mom even threw in a standard excuse, stating they had always been busy and never meant to hurt me. Meanwhile, my extended family was contacting out discreetly. A couple aunts and cousins messaged me to tell how much they appreciated the event and to share their own memories of being forgotten by my parents in different situations. It was nice to know I wasn't dreaming things, but it also made me understand just how deep these patterns ran. Social media wasn't helping my parents' case either. The event images had gathered traction with friends, co-workers, and mutuals, noting on how innovative and brave the gesture was. Some of my co-workers even addressed it at work, stating they respected the way I transformed a difficult circumstance into something great. My folks, on the other hand, were plainly feeling the heat. Their social circle had received wind of the drama, and they weren't handling it well. Later that afternoon, I got a text from my mom. It was a half-hearted apology, blaming hectic schedules for the years of neglect, and insisting they'd always wanted to do better. In order to accommodate the entire family, she proposed that we divide the voyage. Portraying it as a means of recovering from this circumstance, I responded that the reservation was non-transferable and non-refundable, which was accurate. Nevertheless, she persisted in pressing the matter. It wasn't much better with my siblings. Together, they confronted me and accused me of making this year's birthday all about me, destroying everyone's future birthdays. I remained composed and clarified that this had nothing to do with them. After years of being disregarded, it was about taking charge of my own birthday. They seemed much more irate as a result. My buddies, on the other hand, were only encouraging. They urged me to continue establishing boundaries and reminded me that I didn't know anybody who apologized. My parents' sudden interest in family gatherings, one of them quipped, was evidence that the party had struck a chord. I saw my parents' desperation growing during the day. They began phoning and left voicemails about how the family might have bonded over this voyage. I wish I had thought about them while I was planning. I didn't respond. I could see where this was going. They sought to use remorse to get me to alter the story. In the evening, my dad sent a message stating that they wanted to meet in person to resolve the matter. I agreed to meet even though I knew this was their attempt to reclaim control of the issue. I reasoned that rather than letting everything drag on, it was best to deal with everything directly. I told myself that this meeting was not going to be about pleasing anyone before I answered. The goal was to put everything on the table. As the day came to an end, I became aware of a change. I wasn't seeking approval from my family for the first time. The party's success, my friends' encouragement, and even the consequences had demonstrated to me that I could advocate for myself and make my own happiness. I had no intention of being the neglected middle kid again, no matter what occurred. The family meeting update was scheduled for the following Saturday in a neutral venue, a tiny cafe that we had all visited previously. For encouragement, I brought along one of my closest friends. Just in case things went out of control, they remained in the background but still within earshot. Together, my parents and siblings showed up looking anxious. From the beginning, it was obvious that this would not be a simple chat. My mom got right into it as soon as we sat down. She said that my party and the crew's revelation had embarrassed them in front of the broader family, and she accused me of attempting to split the family. She said that my actions had made them appear like horrible parents, and that it was unjust to keep them out of the planning. My father, who was seated calmly next to her, gave her the occasional nod but said little else. I remained composed and waited for her to finish before answering. I clarified that the purpose of the event was not to make anyone seem bad. After being ignored for years, I wanted to celebrate myself. I dug out screenshots of previous family group conversations where my birthday wasn't even mentioned, and I reminded them of all the birthdays they had either forgotten or ignored. I drew attention to the glaring difference between my milestones being disregarded and my siblings being honored. That did not sit well with my siblings. My brother cut me off, claiming that he had not observed any partiality and accused me of exaggerating the situation. My sister added that I was being theatrical and that I should have raised my voice sooner if I had an issue. I had no intention of allowing them to alter history. I gently described how, despite my repeated attempts over the years, including hints, recommendations, and even my own planning, I was consistently turned down. I also highlighted how my parents seemed to be caught off guard by the same pattern that other family members had seen. When I mentioned the supportive texts I had gotten from aunts, uncles, and cousins, they shared a glance, obviously agitated. My mother's voice changed. She broke down in tears, claiming she had tried her hardest and was unaware of how unwanted I felt. As she sobbed, she said that it had been difficult to offer everyone the same amount of attention because of balancing job, family, and other obligations. My father remained silent and appeared uneasy. Despite acknowledging her sentiments, I refused to back down. Although I acknowledged that life might get hectic, I informed her that this did not justify years of disregard. I made it apparent that I didn't aim to do harm to anyone. They were intended to solve an issue that had been neglected for far too long. My dad acknowledged that they could have done more when I questioned him about why he had never intervened. He said he had always thought my mother had everything under control and was unaware of the extent to which it had impacted me. It was the closest thing I had ever received from him, but it wasn't quite an apology. Then the finger-pointing began. In a dispute over who should organize family gatherings, my parents betrayed one another. My dad retorted that she insisted on celebrating birthdays herself, while my mom accused him of being uninvolved. As the fight heated up, my siblings' uneasiness was evident. I used the occasion to explain that neither of them had ever observed or cared that my siblings were also not fair-minded. Every year, my brother and sister had gladly embraced the limelight without ever wondering why I wasn't treated the same way. Apparently, that touched a nerve. My brother crossed his arms defensively, while my sister moved in her seat, avoiding eye contact. I made the decision to set certain limits at that moment. I informed him that if they wanted to be a part of my life going ahead, I would no longer put up with being disregarded or neglected. They had to try, not only on my birthday, but all the time. Additionally, I stated that any future plans including me would need to be sincere rather than theatrical. My parents grudgingly agreed to put in more effort, but it was obvious from their tone that they were more focused on containing the harm than addressing the root causes. My sister surprised me by becoming a little softer. She apologized hesitantly, acknowledging that she had not recognized the harmful nature of the interaction. It was something, but not much. On a tense note, the meeting concluded. There was no genuine reconciliation, no group embrace, and no great resolution. We parted ways as we left the cafe, obviously each of us digesting the situation differently. Together, my parents and siblings departed while continuing to have hushed conversations. For a time, my companion and I remained behind to unwind and discuss what had just transpired. Later that night, as I made my way home, I had an odd combination of resignation and empowerment. I had made my point and refused to back down, but I also understood that some relationships would never completely recover. But for the first time, I was okay with it. I had stopped seeking their approval. I was prepared for whatever occurred next. Update 5. I made the decision to temporarily distance myself from my family following the stressful encounter. I stopped answering unnecessary texts, but I didn't ban anyone or make a big deal out of it. I needed time to think things through and decide how to proceed. My extended relatives continued to get in touch throughout the interim. Some family members gave me a call to see how I was doing, while others texted me to provide encouragement and to confirm that they understood my situation. Their assistance meant a great deal. I felt like I was finally seen by a member of my family. My sister astonished me with a follow-up note a few days later. Once more, and with greater sincerity, she apologized. She acknowledged that before to the discussion, she hadn't given much attention to how our family dynamic affected me. She even admitted that she had observed how frequently my birthdays were forgotten, but she was unaware of how upsetting it must have been. For the first time, I thought she truly understood. We continued messaging one another, and although it didn't end the years of annoyance, it was a positive start. On the other side, my folks were everywhere. My mother would occasionally send a lengthy, sincere text message expressing her desire to mend our relationship. She would write a passive-aggressive message the next day, saying that if I had included them, the trip might have been a wonderful way for the family to unite. My dad tended to be quiet, but when he did talk, it was generally to agree with my mom. I responded in a kind but succinct manner because it was difficult to trust their intentions because of their inconsistencies. I began going to therapy at this period. It wasn't until things came to a head that I understood how much growing up in that atmosphere had affected me. I was able to process the years of emotional neglect and create more constructive boundaries with the support of therapy. Although it was difficult labor, taking charge of my own story felt fantastic. The cruise followed. I asked a select few close friends to accompany me, and we embarked on an amazing journey. We spent the days traveling to stunning places, dining on delicious meals, and generally having a good time on the ship, which was as opulent as I had imagined. On social media, I shared a couple updates, just photos of the group having fun and the landscape, nothing fancy. The reaction was overwhelmingly in the affirmative. People complimented me for taking the time to celebrate myself and said I looked really happy. It stood in sharp contrast to the guilt trips my parents had been giving me. My parents, in particular, weren't very excited about the posts. On one photo, my mother wrote a passive-aggressive remark about how wonderful it would have been to spend this time together as a family. Later, she removed it, but not before several family members pointed it out to her. As usual, my dad remained silent, but I gathered from rumors that they were both angry about being excluded. It's interesting to see that my sister began to change. She informed me that she had been attempting to assist my parents understand things from my point of view. She also acknowledged that she had been considering how our family ignored my milestones in favor of hers and my brother's. I was a little hopeful that things may get better as the holidays drew near, since it was the most self-awareness I had ever witnessed from any of my siblings. I was asked to a family get-together by my parents. They implied that they wished to make apologies and assured that it would be unique. After giving it some thought, I made the decision to go even though I wasn't sure I was ready. I was clear that if my limits weren't upheld, I would leave. I knew they were making an effort when I got there. I was surprised by my mother's kind act of setting up a little table with a belated birthday present. My brother was softer than normal, and my dad gave me a warm welcome. It was not an ideal evening. Even while there were some unpleasant times, it was a positive move. When my sister raised her voice at supper, it was the biggest surprise. She mentioned how terrible it was that the family had previously forgotten my birthday. She didn't mince words or offer an explanation. She just admitted the issue and urged everyone to improve. My parents nodded in agreement, though they appeared a bit uneasy. It seemed like progress, even if it wasn't a complete conclusion. As the evening wore on, I came to the realization that although things weren't entirely resolved, they were heading in the right way. Even if their attempts still seemed a little awkward, my parents appeared sincere in their desire to try. I was encouraged by my sister's new outlook that at least one of my family relationships may undergo a substantial improvement. In hindsight, the cruise was about more than simply getting my birthday back. It was a pivotal moment. It helped me understand that I didn't need their approval to be worthwhile going ahead, and made my family face years of neglect. I'm determined to put myself first and surround myself with sincere, caring individuals. It will be interesting to see whether my family joins that circle, but for the time being, I'm content with the situation as it is.